Back again with another horse and musket video. I decided I wanted to set up a bigger battle. After you saw my last video, I had a lot of fun playing through that, and obviously all this terrain looks really cool on the tabletop. Really adds to the immersion and the flavor of what's going on. I've upgraded a few more of the components with some really cheap options, and I'll tell you where you can find those. I am going to try and actually upgrade the village tiles to tiny little buildings. Again, the same place where I found some of these fortifications. I did find some options for buildings, which will be pretty cool. But this, obviously, as you can see, is a much bigger battle. Here, we've got the French facing off against the Anglo-Dutch here at the Battle of Neerwinden in, 1693, I believe? 1697, one of those two. Way more units on the board. You can see the French here in the foreground, and then we've got the Dutch behind some fortified lines and some their British allies there. And then over on this flank, we've got more French, including the Duke of Luxembourg right there in the foreground. And they're on sort of this high ground with some more Dutch here covering the Anglo-allied right. So this is going to be much bigger, but this video is also twofold because I want to do a playthrough of the core horse and musket rules so you can see kind of what that looks like and how the game plays. What I really like so far about this system is how modular it is. So obviously the game, there's a whole section in the rulebook about supporting minis and playing the game with minis, which is awesome. And there's also a bunch of optional rules that you can use or not use at your leisure to upgrade the fidelity of the historical model or add some complexity to the game. It is not a complex game right out of the box. It is very comparable to something like Commands and Colors, just with no cards. But there are some things here that you can add in the rule book, optional rules that will increase sort of the fidelity of the historical simulation. So that is one aspect of this video. The second aspect of this video is that there is a second set of rules using this system. It's really more of a mod called Horse and Foot, and I'll put a link in the description down below about where you can find that. Horse and Foot was designed essentially by Phil Sabin, and Phil Sabin, if you're unfamiliar with who he is a professor and military historian in England, who I believe works with the British Defense. An academy for the UK defense, something like that. He also wrote the book and designed the game Lost Battles, which is an ancient tactical system that doesn't use hexes but uses squares for its sort of combat modeling, and is actually really interesting and really creative in the way that it simulates tactical warfare in the ancient world. And so he took it upon himself, because he played Horse and Musket and really liked it, to sort of mod the core rule book and sort of streamline and simplify and change a few things about Horse and Musket, and he calls it Horse and Foot. That is a free download that you can find on Board Game Geek under the Horse and Musket page, also on his website, I believe. He's designed a bunch of other stuff as well. He's his thinking around war games is so unique and interesting, and his modeling is very unlike sort of what you would find in sort of like the core war game sort of paradigm. So whenever he does something, I'm always very curious, because Lost Battles is like a really unique tactical system. And so when I saw that he had created some new rules for Horse and Musket, I got immediately interested. And I started reading them. They're very simple. They're only 3 or 4 pages. Part of that is because they build on top of the core Horse and Musket rules. So you need to know how to play core Horse and Musket before you can play Horse and Foot. But he does make some tweaks in his version of the system that he feels increases the historical accuracy. 2 of the main ones there are the number of dice that units roll on attack, and secondly, how you generate command action points. At the beginning of each turn, each side is going to roll some dice and determine how many actions you're going to be able to take that turn. He kind of changes the formula about how you calculate that. And I want to use Neerwinden as a way to explore both systems using the same battle to see what we can find, what we can divine out of differences that those different models provide to the way the game plays. So I will be playing this battle twice. I'll give you a much closer in view of the Horse and Musket playthrough of the battle, and then I'll reset it up, and I'll do another playthrough of Neerwinden using the Horse and Foot rules and explain to you what's different. And then that will be a bit more abbreviated, because you've already seen kind of how it works. So that is the plan. I'm getting a little bit closer here. Here's the French with their artillery. I just love the look of these models. It's very minimal assembly for these artillery pieces. Wood glue helps if you are getting into some of the WoFun stuff. They're a little finicky to put together, but once you get them, you get a nice 3D effect here with the little artillery crews. And each of the units comes with a bunch of different poses for artillery crew, so you can kind of depict how they're working on the gun or manning the gun and whatnot. And here's some French line infantry. So with Horse and Musket, I'm looking through the optional rules and I'm deciding what I want to play with. I think in order to, so if you don't play with any of the optional rules, the linear warfare doctrine doesn't really shine through too much when you're playing the game. And I definitely want that to come through. That's the reason I got invested in this system. And so I am going to be playing with the facing rules. So there's essentially no facing in the core game, but I'm going to play facing rules, and that is why you see all of these positions facing a hex vertex. So facing, you can only attack into your 2 front hexes, and that is how we're going to be playing the game. And then there's also flank bonuses if you attack in the rear or flank of an enemy unit. So it does mean that you will maintain a linear integrity across your line because you do not want to get flanked. That's part of what I would like to play with. I'm also going to be playing with, there's rules for randomizing the combat order when you're doing fire combat. I won't be playing with those, I don't think this time out. But I am going to be playing with the skirmish, the infantry, and horsemen retreat and fire combat. So if you critically fail your fire combat with line infantry, or light footmen or horsemen, you have to retreat 1 hex. So I'm going to be playing with that. I didn't play with that last time. I am going to be playing with subordinate leadership. So of the leaders we have on the battlefield here, we've got a minor Dutch leader here. On top of this hill, we've got William III, who's not a great leader. His rating is 2 there, and he's both of these leaders in kind of precarious positions, like not with any troops with them. We're gonna have to fix that. We do have some French leaders. We have a minor French leader down here. I forget his name in the scenario setup. And like I mentioned, we have the Duke of Luxembourg here with his entourage on horseback. We'll see a little bit more of them later. Another minor French leader up over on this hex over here. So minor leaders, I'm going to play that they're allowed to give you a discount of your action points if you roll successfully against the leader's morale. I'm also going to be playing the locked in combat rules. So as soon as you move adjacent to an enemy, you are locked in place there. You're not allowed to move or change facing without doing a morale check. And so that is also going to contribute to the sort of the linear formation sort of modeling historical simulation that we want to get out of this. I think I'm going to, I was thinking about doing the command range rule. So this is when a unit is more than 3 hexes from a leader, in order to move or change facing, it must pass a morale check. The battle here is so big that I'm not sure I want to do that. That would mean, so for example, 1, 2, 3, that would mean these 2 units on the end. This is some Dutch line infantry here, as well as this Dutch cavalry would have to roll against their morale in order to move. But that may also encourage me to move leaders to a position where their command range will actually matter. So I actually may play with the command range rules on this one now that I think about it. I think that would make... The command in this game is pretty easy. Like, you just designate whoever you want to do something. So I actually may use the command range rules to introduce some command and control friction to the proceedings. I think that might... Well, we'll see. I'll come to an opinion on it after we play it. And then... I'm not going to be doing any leader rerolls. Well, I might do leader rerolls. Basically, if there's a leader in combat, you can spend an extra command point to reroll a die. Not going to be playing with ammunition. And yeah, so we're going to do kind of like the facing, the retreat before combat if you critically fail your fire combat, and the command range rules and the locked in combat rules. And that should, I think, to my mind, get a pretty good depiction of linear warfare using this relatively simple system. And then, like I said, we'll set it up again and play it back with horse and foot, which has some differences. Just a quick note on the tactical situation. We've got a large French force here, a lot of the French artillery. We've got another French force here, including French guards in these 2 hexes, approaching on the Anglo-Allied right. We've got a line of fortified positions by the British and the Dutch here, which is going to be a pretty stiff job because they've also got artillery in those positions as well. The British also artillery on the front line. And then we've got some cavalry reserves under the Dutch here behind William III in these high grounds. So the French, in order to win, there's a certain number of victory points. So victory points in this system are unit eliminations or controlling victory point hexes, which in this scenario are these 2 hilltops. The Anglo-Dutch start in possession of those 2, and I believe they need 5 points to win. So they only need 3 points to win the battle. So the French are going to have to figure out a way to get in there and try and take those. So the French are definitely on the attack. So yeah, we definitely don't want to be moving really close to the Dutch artillery or the British artillery here if we can help it. But is there enough time to kind of make a flanking maneuver around this way? Hard to say. I think really the key to the battle is going to come down to this French left and whether or not the French guard get into it, into the battle. If they can successfully roll up this right side of the Anglo-Dutch, it's going to be really hard. They're going to force these Dutch cavalry units to have to pivot around and contest the rear there. So we may find some openings in that way. The game's not going to take very long, probably no more than maybe 45 minutes or so. So let's get rolling with it. Oh, one other thing. So some special rules. One, so each scenario specifies some special rules that a side might have. The French infantry has pikes in this scenario that makes their line infantry worse when they're firing at range 1 and 2, and they also don't get flank bonuses because some of the ranks of their infantry don't have ranged weapons, they have pikes. And then the rigid artillery rule is in effect for both sides, so that means all artillery units cost 2 command action points to move, and they can't retreat and are destroyed if they're forced to retreat. So if we can overrun some artillery positions, we can potentially take away a big weapon that both sides have to use against the other. Okay, that's enough of me talking. You've seen the battlefield, you've seen the minis, it looks really good. Let's get going with this one. Getting underway, Battle of Neerwinden. So, first thing we have to do, beginning of each turn, is check the command action points for each for the side that's going. So the French, I believe, have initiative in this scenario. They're attacking. So you can see here, we check the number of game turns, victory points. The normal map has a space for all these markers. I just used the general track for this because I'm using special terrain, special tiles for playing the game. So every turn, each side is going to get a default command action point allowance. So 2 for the Allies and 5 for the French. That is going to put a significant command strain on the Anglo-Dutch, given that 2 is a very low number. And then when it's your turn, you roll a d6 and add to that based on this chart here. So you always get a variable number of caps each turn, and you add it to your default base that you get. So the French right now are going to roll. They rolled a 1, so they're only going to get 1 additional cap this turn. And then we're going to take the French turns, and you're going to spend caps to do a bunch of different actions. Here is the action table. It tells you how many caps to do things. And don't forget, we are under rigid artillery doctrine, so moving artillery is actually going to cost 2 caps. And no unit can do something more than once, with the exception of some special rules around cavalry and dragoons, which is skirmisher rule, I believe, where they can move and fire or fire and move. So we're going to spend the French caps, and then I'll show you what I have done with the French on this first turn to try and dispossess the Anglo allies of this hilltop. All right, so looking at the battlefield from the Anglo-Allied point of view, we had the French on the first turn with their 6 caps move this line of French infantry all in a line from the tops of these hills into the Anglo-Allied right. So we got four infantry units advancing here across this open ground towards this town position where the Dutch guard and Dutch artillery are stationed. And then we had a couple of French artillery bombardments against this town hex here against the British, trying to soften them up for a potential assault. Unfortunately, it's very tough to hit on the combat table with artillery at range of 2. They needed a 9, basically. They needed a 9 in general, and they're also -1 for firing into the town. So only a 9 would have done it, and they both missed. Both fires ineffective against there. So that's the end of the French turn. Very easy, very simple. Next turn, we may see some attacks by the French, especially against this position here, against the Dutch Guard. And now we're going to move it on over to the Anglo-Allies. They have 2 caps, and they're going to roll to see how many bonus caps they get, and we're going to see what their response is. All right, so for their part, the Anglo-Allies, with their limited number of caps, just turned a lot of their forces on this flank to face the oncoming French march. And that was basically the end of their turn. They did fire with some artillery, but were not able to hit the oncoming French. The French, on their second turn, ended up moving in this French unit here. I'm kind of turning the 2 bases to kind of face which are in their front hexes. Just gives me a nice visual representation of where these regiments or battalions or brigades, however, whatever the scale is in this battle, where they're facing. So you can see that the French here in this hex are facing they have their 2 front hexes are here. That was their move. We had a bunch of fire combats initiated against the Dutch Guard. The French were unable to cause any sort of losses. Again, the town there that these units are taking cover in is quite formidable. It's really hard to hit where we're at, and also the French suffering a -1 to their range fire because of their pikes is not helpful whatsoever. We did move a French leader up to get the morale bonus in case there's a counterattack. And then we had some more French artillery fire on this British position here to no effect. And in fact, the infantry here who had been in this hex, they fired. And I'm using that rule where if you roll a 0 in fire combat, you have to retreat. I actually kind of like it. It simulates kind of simultaneous fire happening, even though mechanically in the game only one side takes actions on their turn. So if you roll a 0, it kind of represents that like fire coming from the enemy is it pushes you back and forces you back. So you can have kind of a retreat when you attack, which I think makes a lot of sense. If you move in and you enter a volley, you might have a counter volley against you, force some cohesion against you. So the French infantry here, line infantry, retreated back to this artillery position, and again the artillery no effect. So we've already blasted through 2 turns here for the French, and we're about to have the Anglo allies go. Really nothing much happening down on this side of the battle. It's mostly been this French flank advance. They're trying to find some way to take some ground or put some pressure on this sort of right flank of the Anglo-Allied line. 2 other things I should mention quickly. One, you can store command action points. So the French didn't use all of theirs. They only used 6 of their 7. They can store that one for next turn. That value is equal to your overall army commander's rating. So here we've got Luxembourg. He's got a 4. So the French could conceivably store 4 caps per turn. The reason you want to store is obviously so you can build up to a big offensive turn, or you can also use your caps to try and seize the initiative if you don't go first. So if the Allies store some caps turn over turn, which is going to be difficult because William is the overall commander and he's only got a 2. They can use those caps before the French roll to see what their bonus caps are to become the first player on the turn. So there is an initiative system in the game, and if you really want to, you can try and seize it. I think the British, given the first 2 turns and the way the Allies have kind of withstood the first French attack, they may want to consider doing that this turn depending on what they roll. Let's roll it and see what we get. We got a 2, so we get 2 additional caps. So again, we get 4 caps here. On average, the Anglo-Allies are going to get 4 caps a turn, and the French are going to get 7 caps a turn. So command advantage for the French in this particular scenario. I also wanted to mention these little gray things that you see here. These are entrenchments at the, I think, 2 or 3 millimeter scale from a site called Pico Armor, which makes a lot of cool minis and 3D printed stuff for miniatures gaming at 2 to 3 millimeters, which is extremely tiny, and that's why the site is called Pico Armor. But they are perfectly sized to represent entrenchment terrain for this system because each of the little models is exactly almost the width of a hex side on these 100 millimeter hexes. So if I bring this up and show you and see if I can get it to focus, you can see that they're come on. Okay, well, anyways, believe me, they're extremely tiny entrenchments. My camera's acting weird. So you can see the little logs there, the little gun ports. I think they're for World War II, but they work just as well for here. I mean, I'm trying them out for this system because they're really perfectly sized. And, while it is not to scale, I would have liked entrenchment terrain to be to scale. It's difficult to find scale that will fit in these hexes that are made for minis. So that's where you can find these Pico Armor. I think it's picoarmor.com, and they get stuff out. They're really cheap. I think they were like $5 for a set of 6. So, or maybe it's like $2 for a set of 6. Really cheap and affordable anyway. Well, French artillery continues to not be able to have any effect against the entrenched Allied positions. We had multiple French fires here on this kind of corner against the British. Nothing doing there. But we did get our first casualties of the game for both sides, actually. The Dutch Guard managed to cause a loss here to these French on the Allied turn. And then here, the French decided that they were going to attempt to close assault this hill against the Dutch infantry that was atop it. The Dutch infantry passed the morale check, but did not score any hits in defensive fire. And then the French line close combat actually did 2 hits to these infantry units here. So we've reduced them by half. Their morale is down to a 2. And so we're just chipping away here at this right flank. If we can get on top of that hill, it's going to cause the Anglo-Allies position here to become pretty untenable because there's nothing back here. They're either going to have to bring some Dutch from the reserve back here, this cavalry, or they're going to have to fall back on this position here. So looking pretty good for the French at this point. The advantage in caps is really a huge boon to their attack because they can activate so many units while the Anglo-Dutch are playing a purely defensive game, which is actually how Neerwinden went historically. So we are going to head into turn 3 after I take the Anglo-Allied turn, and I believe the number of turns we have to win the game as the French, I think it's either I have to check how many turns it is. It's a significant number, but the turns go by really fast, so suddenly before you know it, the clock's ticking against you. It is 20 turns for both sides, so we've got a ways to go. If the French need 6 victory points in 20 turns. So far, 0 victory points, but we're halfway to one with that reduced Dutch brigade up there. Not a great situation for the Dutch. We tried to do some repelling fire against the French and failed pretty miserably. The artillery did score a hit here against these this center brigade of French coming into their face from town. Unfortunately, a Dutch guard also attempted a volley, and they were forced back, rolled a 0 on their roll. So they were forced back into William's hex along with these dragoons, and it looks like the French are going to be able to basically have free reign against this artillery in this town, which is not good because artillery can't retreat in this scenario. Might be time maybe for the French to bring up the French guard, see if they can come this way. We're probably going to do another close assault on this hill to try and take it. That would really put the Dutch in a bad position, and the British would have to respond to that. Still no action down here. We did get a couple of artillery fires on the British position again. Nothing going. These entrenchments are pretty powerful, as you would expect from 18th century. More French artillery bombardments across the line. We actually did score a hit against the British here. 2 hits, actually, on one of our bombardments, and it reduced this British regulars unit down to half morale. So that's not good because the French are pouring in manpower against this flank, and the Dutch are taking the worst of it. We had some volleys exchanged against the Dutch here. Actually, this should be with 2 more hits to the Dutch here. So that elite brigade is now at half strength. That's not great. We did do another close assault on the hilltop. We weren't not successful, but we're going to keep pounding that if we can. And we had more volleys thrown in here. These Dutch dragoons came up to reinforce this artillery position after the guard was forced out on this turn, and they also took a casualty from French volley fire. So the French are just going to be happy to just keep pasting these positions and hopefully generate some victory points out of it and collapse that flank. Next turn, oh, and I should also mention the Anglo-Dutch did seize the initiative on this turn, so they did manage to go first, but they were unable to cause really any losses to the French. And it's looking like the cracks in the dam, in the dike, as it were, are starting to show. So the British are going to have to probably reposition some of their cavalry and dragoons to hopefully do something about this advance. Here we have some Dutch cavalry who were ordered to fall back from the left wing and come over to support this in case there is a breakthrough. So definitely playing defense here. The one thing that I've noticed about the rules is that you can't actually move units backwards. There's no disengagement once especially if you're playing with the facing rules, because it says you can only move into your front hexes. So there's actually no way to kind of fall back and retreat. I may house rule that. I may create kind of a custom house rule that for 2 caps, you can move an engaged unit backwards out of the line, because that probably would be possible, or possibly, you spend a cap and then have to roll a morale check to move backwards, and then maybe the enemy gets like 1 die of fire, something like that, to like sort of reflect the ability to sort of retreat in the face of utter destruction. I think that should be in here. And oddly, you can do it if you're not playing with the facing rules, but if you're playing with facing rules, it doesn't let you do that. So yeah, we'll see what I can come up with there. It will probably be a morale check, I would say. To do that. I'll figure out what the balance is going to be. Anyways, we're moving into the next turn. The French are going to be going first. The Dutch have run out of all of their seize the initiative opportunities in this game. They tried to do it early to hopefully cause some losses and blunt this charge, but haven't done it, and the French have been rolling really well for their caps. Yeah, it's looking real bad for the Allies here. The French ended up taking the hill this turn, forcing William and the remnants of this infantry brigade back. This artillery is now caught out alone in this town. These dragoons were forced back after some volley fire. The French closing in. You can see they've made an advance here, managed to eliminate the Dutch guard, take this hex, and now the only thing standing between them and the British are the remnants of these Dutch units. These British here are in a real lick of trouble. Probably going to have to do a cavalry charge next turn. Yeah, well, no, because I'm going to have to do a cavalry charge next turn against the actually I won't be able to do it next turn. I'll have to move them to face, and then I can do a cavalry charge the turn after that. So we're in a really bad way here. The British are on the board with 2 victory points by destroying the Dutch Guard. Both sides with 2 victory points, because obviously the British have here. No French eliminations yet, and I think I am going to bring the French Guard up next turn, depending on how many caps we roll, to see if we can maybe this unit. It'll take a couple turns, but if I can take out this artillery unit, that's some more victory points. I think that artillery unit, yeah, they're full strength, but the British artillery here is close to breaking. Well, the Dutch right flank has been driven back to the brink as the French continue to pour down to exploit this this collapse in the line, in the constitution of the army. However, we actually just did a cavalry charge. So you remember I brought that cavalry who was over here to try and reinforce this flank, and he, with the French breakthrough here, these French dragoons, or French line infantry, moving through here, pushing William and this unit back off of the hill, kind of out of range of the army support. This cavalry unit made a charge against these French infantry. They failed their morale check, and then the roll for the charge was 2 hits, excuse me. So that is enough to get our first eliminated French unit and give the Anglo allies a sorely needed victory point. So that is going to mean that these cavalry come here. And now suddenly William might be able to rally some of his units next turn and maybe put up some sort of defense against the oncoming French advance. Should also be noted the Duke of Luxembourg, he's in here in this town after the French managed to take it. He set up a new headquarters there. You can see him on horseback with his retainers. So the French Guard are coming up from behind. We may want to try and deploy them if we can. Against the British. We've also got these dismounted dragoons. I really like this model. So when you order the dragoon sprue, they come with mounted dragoons or dismounted dragoons for the French. So you can see we've got some dismounted dragoons in front, and in the back we've got some horses that don't have any units on them, and there's a guy kind of taking care of them. So I think that's pretty cool. Really nice attention to detail on the model front there. Okay, let's move on with finish the French turn. We're really close to victory points. The French now have 4 VPs. They just need 2 more to win. It is a super close game right now. Both sides 1 victory point away from taking the battle. French suffered some pretty bad luck in the last couple of turns. They had to use a lot of their caps to move up fresh troops to this flank, and so you can see now we've got over here, we've got the French Guard coming in against these British, sort of holding out, trying to hold out against the Guard advance. We've outrun our artillery for the most part. French artillery starting to pound away over in this position. We did some losses to the Dutch here, but in general, the Anglo allies have fallen back into a pretty good position while causing losses, which I think is probably necessary to win. That's what they're going to have to do. We have William over here with what looks to be some, on this hill, yeah, with some dragoons or cavalry, who I think it's the cavalry, the cavalry that charged. They did a fire attack and then rolled a 0 and had to withdraw, but they did hit the French Guard and hit some losses there. So the Guard are now at half strength, so they're down to die in combat. And then this Dutch Dragoons unit actually, from this swamp, did a fire and retreat a skirmish, and they actually wiped out a French Dragoons unit, I believe, or no, an infantry unit that was over here, so scoring a point and withdrawing back to the safety of this town. So the French really need to win it on this turn because they're in kind of a fragile position. These Guards units, 2 hits and they're dead, and we could execute another cavalry charge here with William. For that matter. And the British are in a position to fire on some of the advancing French as well. So we really need to get a kill to win the battle right now as the French, and we're going to try and do it. The Anglo allies have had a hell of a time getting their units facing. This cav unit on the hill has just not been able to change facing, because you have to roll their morale if they're next to an enemy and they're facing this direction, so they can't actually respond to either of these guys. So he's failed like 4 times in a row. So it's been really tough for the British to get organized in the face of this French advance. So here we go. What will likely be the last turn, turn 11. Each side just needs 1 VP to win. And the French are in a pretty good position for it. The battle is over, and it is a French victory. After they stormed the heights on the last turn of the game, they've got a leader there with them. They did a close assault against the unit that was atop that. That was a British cav unit that was atop that hill, the one that couldn't get turned. They ended up storming the hill, taking it, doing massive casualties. And there's no way that the Dutch cavalry here could. They tried to charge, but they couldn't. It was actually, I don't think they could have charged because it's hill to hill, and that would have forced them to stop, I believe. Yeah, so they couldn't have charged. They did a fire attack, and it was to no effect. And so, yeah, it's a French victory. There's 7 points to the British Anglo-Allied 4. Most of the action taking place on this flank over here. Some losses were incurred. These dragoons retreating out of danger, but for the most part, the French were. They steamrolled over a pretty stout defense, to be honest with you. We did lose we lost a couple of French infantry units and half of the French guard from that brigade there. But overall, not too many losses. A lot more losses on the Anglo-Dutch side. We had the Dutch guard eliminated. We had some Dutch infantry, these British, looks like British cavalry unit, and then these two artillery, a Dutch and British artillery unit. Here, I'll turn them so you can see the guys. These are the British, these are the Dutch. So yeah, pretty big casualties here on the Anglo-Dutch side, and we do get a French victory at Neerwinden, which I believe was a historical outcome. Not a lot of action happening here. It was, I think, partially because it was, the Dutch didn't want to abandon these fortifications. They give too much of an advantage, and the French could never really soften them up for their infantry to advance through the cavalry. So, the artillery did cause some losses to the British here. We pushed the British out of this town, forced them back to a perimeter there by the hills, but it was really that right flank, or the French left flank, really, that did all of the work, the path of least resistance, and they managed to win the Battle of Neerwinden. So here we are at the end. This is what it looks like. Pretty fun. I love the minis. Looks great. Yeah, and this is the core rules with some of the optional rules added. I do think that in this battle, we have enough leaders that the leader command range didn't really come into play. But I do think that the being locked into combat was a pretty big deal in terms of like preventing retreats. Once you are in line opposing the enemy forces, you really have to fight or die. We'll look at that as a possible house rule. And then the unit facing, really important. There were a couple of times where there were flanks, but it was mostly by the French, and they didn't get in this battle because of the pikes. They didn't get any advantage for flanking. So that didn't really come into play, but I do like the unit facing. It adds like a tactical feel to what's going on the battlefield. And I really do like when a unit rolls a 0 on fire combat, they have to retreat. There were a couple of times when I got the outcome of that when I wanted to. Like I fired and wanted to get out of there, and I rolled a 0, and it was a little gamey. I was able to escape danger, but without any other options for retreating backwards, I do think it's a nice addition to the system. It does make for some unexpected stuff happening. It does allow for the exchange of hex control. So these guard units fired on the British, they rolled a 0, they had to back up. And had the British been able to maneuver, had they not been adjacent to these French units here, they would have been able to take the town back. So I think there is value in that rule playing this system. Overall, plays real quickly, really smoothly. And it's a fun tactical battle game. Deciding what to do with your caps every turn means that you're really highly localizing your decisions in the battlefield. So it's not just like a broad front where everyone gets to do something. You really have to send your commands to specific parts of the battle. And it does feel correct in that way, in the sense that you wouldn't get a unified advance across the entire line, and maybe the battle is joined over here, and the French did throw some artillery fire in, but there was not going to be a giant sweeping maneuver of an army of this size. So I like the way the system encourages you to put your orders into sort of a critical mass in one area of the battlefield to try and achieve some sort of breakthrough. It does feel in line with sort of like how these battles developed. And then on the other side of that, you can use your caps where the action is not happening to activate a different wing of the army to try and counterattack in a different spot. So, had these entrenchments not been here, I would have been curious to see in a different battle whether the Dutch would have used some of those caps to push forward and try and divert the French's attention on a different flank. So I really like it. Obviously, it's a fun system. It's got a little bit more tactical depth than like a Commands and Colors, while at the same time not being too complex, too crunchy. You could definitely play this with sort of novice or light wargamers for sure. And the different types of attacks you can do, where it's charge combat, fire combat, or close assault, really have different effects on the battlefield, especially when you're testing, making morale checks on a unit that's taken some fire first and sort of soften them up. That's really what you want to be doing. You want to use your artillery and fire combat to soften up kind of a portion of the line, and then you want to make your close assault because it's more likely that they fail their morale check and have to retreat. But yeah, overall, Neerwinden, core horse and musket rules with some optional stuff thrown in from the rule book. It played really nicely. The unpredictability of the caps, the cap additions every turn with the chart in terms of what you roll, how many more caps do you get. The command advantage for the French is really felt in this particular scenario. It's not the most even of battles. So I'm going to reset this up. We're going to play Neerwinden again, and then we're going to use the horse and foot from Phil's Sabin rules. The main things that are going to change: only 2 dice when units attack, and different calculation for caps. So let's do that now. Set up for the second run. Just want to show you real quick the horse and foot modified rules. This is the one-page player aid that is actually far more useful than probably the player aid that comes with the core game. So the difference is here. So this is really, it's like 4 pages, but like I said, it's built off of the core rules, so you need to know how to play the core game. You can see that he basically just goes section by section and modifies some specific rules. A lot of this system appears to be, or this mod appears to be for the pre-1700 era, although you can play it through because there's some special modifiers and rules for 7 Years' War battles and whatnot. But he actually breaks the units up into only 4 types: horse, guns, light foot, and infantry. And then here's all of the unit stats, which I wish there was something like this in this kind of readable format for the core game. And then you're still using a cap system, but the way you calculate caps is different. So you take your overall army commander and you add his value to a d6 roll, and then you subtract. You multiply the number of victory points you've lost times the number of default caps you get every turn based on the scenario, and you take a third of that value, and that's what you subtract from the die roll. So you get this modifier. So for example, on turn 1, if we take the French, army commander's rating is a 4, and then 1/3 of the current turn's caps is 5, so that would be 2 because it's 1/3 rounded down. I believe it's 1/3 rounded down. No, I guess it would be 1 because 1. So +4 minus 1, that's +3. So we roll the d6, we get a 4, and that becomes a 7. So we get +3 caps. So the caps for the turn for the French would be 8 for this turn, which is kind of in the realm of what we had last time. And if we were to do this for the Anglo-Allied turn, their caps every turn is 2. They don't have any victory points lost right now. So 1/3 of 2 rounded down is 0. Their overall army commander is a 2, so they're just adding +2 to the dice. They would roll a 6, +2 is 8, so they would also get +3 caps there. So it'll be interesting to see how this normalizes the curve as we go through the scenario. Different actions are allowed. The one key change here is that you can advance and fire with infantry, but you roll less dice, I believe. That's new. You're not allowed to do that in the core game except via with horse units or light horse units with optional rules, I believe. Or maybe it's not optional, but anyways, that's a new thing, advance. And you can also advance and charge with horse, so that's different. Advance and fire. So there's some different abilities here. There's also leader abilities that are slightly tweaked from the core game. The biggest one is rally. You can't rally a unit unless it's at half morale. In the core game, you can rally a unit, first of all, as many times as you want, and at whatever status, as long as it's taken a hit, if it qualifies for rally. So that's a little different as well. And then dice, like I mentioned earlier, you only roll 2d10s per unit, or 1 if you meet one of these 4 conditions. And then there's a whole bunch of more modifiers to the dice here. So it does change the combat feel a little bit. We'll see how that works out. And then here's the terrain effects table. It tells you whether it blocks line of sight, and then the modifiers for attacking into. So you don't actually use the player aid chart for that one. So yeah, I'm going to check back in and give you my thoughts about how all these changes are affecting the Battle of Neerwinden as I get into it. Finished the horse and foot playthrough of Neerwinden here. We made it 7 turns, so quite a bit shorter than the core rules, and the French actually won by a much larger margin. It was they crossed 6 points while the Anglo-Allies only had 4. And I decided to take a little bit of a different strategy this time to see if I could overwhelm the fortified positions that the Dutch had on their left flank, and I did, or the French did, I should say. The French actually made really great progress across the line. Less so over here on the left. That was a little bit more deadly, and I'll explain why that is using these rules. But The French were successfully able to dislodge the Dutch here along the front fortifications, and that's where really most of the casualties came from. Yeah, it was a pretty bloody affair, actually. Here's all the casualties. These are the Anglo-Dutch casualties. 2 artillery units lost. The British themselves actually really took a pounding over here. They, as you remember, the British start kind of in this general area. They've been pushed back and wiped out. The French also took a lot of casualties here, mostly line infantry. Look, we may have some guard in there. Yeah, we have some French guard here. But overall, a pretty dominating victory here. Maybe they rolled really well. I think, you know, my thoughts on horse and foot, having played this battle with those rules now, using this rule set. So a couple of things that I noticed. One, the command action point thing. I think it's supposed to represent as you lose units, your command structure breaks down. But I think functionally, the sort of more complicated math that you have to do to calculate it, I don't know that it gets you all that much compared to the core game's sort of a random assortment, or sort of curved, like statistical curve of distribution. I actually think in the core rules, the Anglo-Dutch got more commands over the course of the game than they did using this system here. I do worry that it could lead to sort of like a downward spiral where if you get behind, then you get further behind because you get less caps. So I don't know. I don't know that there's any good reason to use this versus this, but I'd have to try it some more. I'd want to maybe see if this command activation system could port to the core rules okay. The biggest thing that I noticed about this is actually the combat table. And the reason why I think the battle was so bloody is this table, the to-hit numbers are so much lower than they are in the core game. Now, you're rolling less dice. You're usually only rolling 1 or 2 dice, but the hit numbers are so much lower that it actually kind of makes up for that, and we got a lot of hits. On top of that, terrain is kind of abstracted. So, like towns here, for example, towns don't provide any sort of cover unless you're light infantry with rough terrain mastery, which is interesting. So like there's no benefit to being in sort of a town, which I don't know how much that makes sense. Like if you think about like the Battle of Blenheim, for example, which was 10 years after this, like the town of Blenheim was like a major conflict zone, and the being able to take cover there by the French is what kind of had them hold it for so long. So I don't know if I agree with that. The entrenchments are -1, of course, expected. I mean, it feels a lot different, this combat system, because you're doing a lot more modifying of the dice. You're rolling less dice, but you're modifying more. Versus in the core game, you're rolling more dice, but you're modifying less. And obviously this one, like I said, more bloody. Of the ones that of the 2 experiences that I've had, I actually think I prefer the core game's combat table a little bit better. It makes terrain matter a little bit more, and because the 2 hit numbers are so high, I'll give you an example. So from the Grand Battles chart here, so you can see that infantry, when they fire, they're hitting on 7s, but here they're hitting on 5s, which is a 20% increase in the chance to hit. So yeah, so more dice, less modifiers, less dice, more modifiers. The one thing I really do like here that I really do like here, although I don't know how much how much I feel like it works, is this advance and fire. So units, in the core game, you either have to move or you have to shoot, or if you can charge, you can charge. But in this one, you can actually advance and fire with 1 die. And that led to a lot of kind of like plinking shots. I don't know how I feel about that. On the one hand, from a gameplay perspective, I do like the utility of like being here, moving in, and then firing. But at the same time, it does kind of take away the feel of linear warfare, which is you need to line your troops up and then hold for a volley. And I think the core rules do that better, personally, or at least it feels better, feels more thematic on the table. So this is definitely something, if you find the core horse and musket to be a little stodgy, then you could play with the advance and fire here, and just you move and then attack with 1 die. I would probably still use the core combat table in terms of the to-hit number rather than this one, because I was doing a lot of hits on advance and fire, and I don't know, I just feel like it doesn't give the linear warfare feel the way that I sort of like mentally envision it. The other interesting thing is that almost every unit can charge in this system, so you can actually charge with infantry. So this kind of replaces the close assault, but again, very, very deadly, 5+ versus close assault here is 6+. So yeah, so I thought it was an interesting variant on horse and musket. I think that there's some interesting stuff going on here, and I think really it just depends on what you sort of want out of this. Of note, I did not play with unit facing in this particular game because the horse and foot rules kind of preclude you from doing that based on the way that they specifically say that you can move or fire in any direction. And I wanted to get a sense of what the system was like, how it was intended. I actually think I prefer the unit facing a lot better. Like I said, more tactical. So all in all, my opinion of core horse and musket rules versus horse and foot, I really like some of the experimental stuff horse and foot is doing, but I think for game feel purposes, for me, I prefer probably the core rules. I may borrow one or two small things from horse and foot, or I may, I might do another, like if I play head to head, we may be, the games are short enough that you could play 2 back to back and, you do 1 core, 1 horse and foot. But in general, I think I prefer the core rules. I think it's a very solid core engine, but there is interesting stuff here. So if you're dissatisfied with the horse and musket core rules, definitely give horse and foot a look, especially if you want something that plays a lot quicker and is a lot more deadly. You'll definitely get that feel from this. So yeah, thanks for joining me for this playthrough of Horse and Musket Neerwinden, pimped out with some minis and what have you. It was a double French victory, as was historically achieved. And I might set something else up now, a new scenario, maybe play through that, maybe something a little bit smaller. But I hope you enjoyed this look at this game system, and it's one that I probably will keep in my collection because it should be pretty easy to get to the table and get played.